Okay, we're going to take a look at what's going on in the currency markets with Charles Hankla. He is an associate professor of comparative and international relations and political science at Georgia State University and joins us now from Atlanta. Thanks very much, Charles, for joining us. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we have heard from the Trump administration that China is manipulating its currency, and we've also heard from Beijing that it is not. In your opinion, yes or no, is China a currency manipulator? And explain.
Well, it's a little bit of a trick question because with the exception of the very small number of countries that have essentially subordinated their currencies to other countries' currencies or to gold, virtually every country in the world to some extent manipulates their currency, if you want to use the pejorative term. And so did China, or is there evidence that China, when it reduced the value of the yuan just a couple of days ago, is there evidence that the purpose of that was essentially to boost its exports? Essentially to offset some of the negative effects of Trump's tariffs? Yes, there is. In fact, the Chinese government essentially said that that was part of the motivation. But is that a currency manipulation which is sort of beyond the pale compared to what many countries do on a regular basis? I would say no. The degree of the cut was only 2%. And there's also reason to believe that were the yuan to float, that actually it might have an even lower value because the Trump tariffs have actually, had the effect of reducing demand for the yuan, and therefore, China has actually, ironically, been boosting the value of the yuan over the last few months.
Charles, in simple terms, when you use terms like "were to float," just explain what that is to viewers.
Well, a perfect floating currency is one that changes with international trading markets, where the government in charge or the central bank in charge doesn't really intervene in its value. In the case of China, the People's Bank of China has more of a managed float situation where every day it comes out and essentially says, this is going to be the average target for the value of the yuan, and it will float within these limits that we set.
Okay, let's talk about Donald Trump. And he has called for a way to possibly devalue the U.S. dollar. Is that possible? And the president's pronouncement can lead people to wonder if we are in some sort of race to the bottom of the pool as far as currency goes.
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, so the U.S. government actually has fewer tools for manipulating the value of the dollar than the Chinese government does. So because the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States is quite, not completely, but quite independent from the executive branch, the president can't really coerce or force the Federal Reserve to change or reduce the value of interest rates, which would be the normal way of reducing the value of the dollar. Now, the Federal Reserve did do that last week, which had the effect of weakening the dollar, but that's something that is not directly in the hands of the executive branch.
Well, walk us through what the obvious concerns could be about lowering the value of currency.
So currency values have benefits and drawbacks, whether they're high or low. So in the case of a weaker currency, it makes a country's exports more competitive, and this is why Donald Trump wants the dollar to be weaker. The downside of having a weaker dollar, of course, is that it means that the buying power of people who hold dollars is less, and so the ability of Americans to, say, consume Chinese goods or goods from other countries would be reduced if the dollar were to depreciate.
Let's focus on Europe and talk about Brexit. Do we need to be worried about currency valuations there? And why could this be important? And if you can, focus on Europe when talk about the concerns moving forward.
Sure. Well, I think the most obvious currency effect of Brexit is to weaken the pound vis-a-vis the dollar and the euro. There is reason to believe that investors in the pound might leave the pound, might flee, because of the negative economic consequences of Brexit. It's also possible, though less certain, that the euro might take a hit if there's more uncertainty about the European project. The irony is that this could actually drive up the value of the dollar as investors in the pound and the euro seek a safer place to put their money. So ironically, it could actually appreciate the dollar, and I'm sure that's something that President Trump would not be very excited about.
Let's kind of quickly here. Should we look at what's going on now as the new norm? Should we expect swings in currency valuations and the ills that it could fuel as the year continues?
Well, I'm loath to make any predictions. I certainly hope not. I mean, the 1930s are a period when we think about these kind of what we call beggar thy neighbor competitive devaluations, where every country was trying to undercut the other country's currency value. That's not something we want to repeat. We have started down just the beginning of that path, but I think it's very early days, so we can hope that both countries will kind of move back from that, and we won't see those types of swings, because that's something that's not going to help anyone in the long term.
Great. Charles Hankla with Georgia State University in Atlanta. We appreciate it. Thank you.